Winabar.
Madam Chair, we're now live.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. The State Board will come back to order. Ms. Maramba, would you please call the roll?
Board Member Durham.
Here.
Board Member Garzica.
Here.
Board Member Esser.
Here.
Board Member McClellan.
Here.
Board Member Rankin.
Here.
Board Member Shuffle.
Here.
Board Member Schroeder.
I'm here. Thank you.
Present.
Thanks for joining us today. We have 3 agenda items to discuss today before we get to our legislative items. In October, you may recall, we voted on a handful of revisions to the proposed 21-22 fiscal year budget. With the budget forecast continuing to look more positive, we are now being asked to restore some funding that from the revisions that we previously made. I'd like to turn this over to Ms. Oakes to provide us an update, please. Ms. Oakes.
Sorry, I started my slideshow too soon and I couldn't find the unmute button. So I will start this and share my screen with you all. Okay, so yes, the purpose of today is to obtain State Board approval for the department's input to the Joint Budget Committee to adjust the budget request that we submitted on November 1st, as well as to alert the board of an identified budget need. So we will start with reconsideration of those budget requests from for the 21-22 school year. So the Joint Budget Committee raised some questions about the advisability of continuing all of the reductions that we had proposed back in the November 1st. And so as you recall, that was about 4 to 5% of our budget reduction. We did anticipate that that's potential just because in any given year, budget forecasts change over time, and this year has been an especially volatile year. So we had discussed with you all about, the potential of having those discussions with that based upon criteria established with the State Board. And those criteria involved prioritizing grants or programs or operations that had the most direct student impact or direct district impact. And so we are again presenting these to you today for your approval. So in light of the more optimistic forecast since November, the department is recommending reconsideration of a handful of items. So from a high level, I'll overview these and then we'll dive in a little bit more detail after. So first, the Workforce Development Pilot Program that was requested, it was to eliminate the full amount of that program, $212,222. Also capital construction reductions that we had included of about 4.6 million. Various personal services reductions, sort of departmental operational items of 1.1. And then within that, an adjustment related to the financial transparency system that we wanted to highlight for you. So the reconsideration items, those total about 5.9 million. Our initial proposed reductions were about 11.6. And so if you were to approve all of these, our revised reductions would be about 5.6 million.
Ms. Oakes, can you move your slides?
Oh,
they have not.
Are they not moving for you?
Not yet.
Okay, let me, I apologize. It's moving on my screen that I'm looking at, so
okay.
I apologize.
Is it moving for the rest of you guys?
No.
Nope, I shared the wrong screen. Again, I really apologize for that. I'm going to unshare. It's hard to see with everything. Let me see if I can move.
There you go.
Is that working? Okay.
That is working now. Ms.
Okay.
Oaks, there is a technology karma that is running about today. So don't.
Okay, well, I apologize for that. It's
Just don't-
affected me. Okay, so now I think you're seeing me move on to the Workforce Development Pilot Program.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So this was one of the items that we had requested suspension. This program was established in 2019 for support for Colorado adults, so over 21 years old without a high school credential. And if this program were restored, that would provide support to about 225 adult learners. And those are earning high school credits towards a high school diploma, attaining a diploma, or other credentials of value to the workforce. And more than 1.8 million in requests were received for $1 million allocation. So there is a great need for that in the community. And a little context, there's about 350 adults in Colorado without a high school credential. And so again, this does have direct student impact, albeit the older populations, but again, we think that that's a very critical part of our community. The second area that we're recommending restoration is related to capital construction. So there's two pieces to this. This reduction was a 5% reduction to both best cash grants and the state aid for charter facilities. And both of those funding streams are typically used to address controlled maintenance issues. And so there has been, as you know, a great focus on air quality and improving ventilation and air quality in schools given the virus. And both of these funding streams could assist in that. So we're recommending restoration of those programs. The next set is we had a number of reductions for CBE operations. Some of those were personal services in terms of staff vacancies and positions. And then some of them were more operational, reductions in travel or operating expenditures. We are recommending that all of those operating type lines remain as reductions, but we are recommending restoration of the personal services. We believe that staffing within CDE really does impact the ability of the department to provide those supports that are necessary and helpful for districts and schools, and in providing the necessary support. So we're recommending restoration of those staffing so that we can have those staffing to support the districts. I mentioned that there was a slight adjustment. It's a $13,000 adjustment to the reduction that we are proposing for the financial transparency. After looking at this in more detail, we really think that having somebody permanent on staff, so what the initial reduction was, is about $370,000 reduction of the personal or that financial transparency line item, so that we could bring it in-house and do that in-house work with a contractor to support our web management team. We really think that it might be better to have a long-term support for that. We think that that would cost about $88,000, not the $75,000 that we requested. So it's a slight adjustment to that. And then if this were approved, we also think that renaming that line item would be appropriate, because while the initial focus will be on that financial transparency and maintaining that same look and feel of the existing financial transparency system, we also think that upgrading the other public facing information that we put out there would be also important and have it more seamless presentation of that. So we think this person could support not only financial transparency, but the more broader public facing website. So renaming the line item to reflect that would be appropriate in our minds. So those are the items for reconsideration. I think I covered them fairly quickly. So if you have any questions, if I wasn't very clear.
Thank you, Ms. Oaks. Before we go around with questions or comments, could I have a motion, please, to approve?
Madam Chair, I move to approve the proposed revisions to the fiscal year 21-22 budget presented by staff and as posted in board docs.
That's a proper motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. So let's go down the line, please, for discussion. Board Member Rankin, do you have questions, comments?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Oakes, I have a couple of questions. Are these that you have listed, are they in order of priority? In other words, if the legislature only wants to do 2 of them, would they be the top 2, the first 2 you have? I'm wondering about the priority system there, and if so, I'd like to change it.
That's a very good question. I don't know that we had really been super thoughtful. I think everybody would be in agreement that that first one would be our top priority because it's the most district facing or the most student facing. But I don't know that we had particularly prioritized those requests. So we are open to priorities input that you would have.
You know, my concern for a long time has been the operation of the website. And I think the transparency issue, I would have moved that up to number 1, only because the constituents and taxpayers many times are frustrated with trying to, you get an answer and it's on the state board website, but when you get in there, it's impossible to locate. And I know I'm not the only one with that, but I think any chance that we can make that seamless to the constituents, I think we're going to have more input by stakeholders in areas that we really do welcome. So I would move that up to number 1 if that is an issue. We've had it every year. We come back with IT department, website, and I think technology is moving a lot more rapidly than we are in the department. I think our interface with the public should be number 1 with transparency. My other question I have is on the Workforce Diploma Pilot Program. I don't need a lot of detail on it, but is this part of that adult education that we have? Is this when someone gets out into the workplace and feels that they need, or their boss says you need to have a high school diploma, that's where this comes in? 225 people doesn't seem all that big to me. So how does that differ from the adult ed? Or?
Yes, it is part of the adult education program. And so this is simply restoring what was already previously provided for in the legislation or prior funding for that. And I see that Misty Ruthven is on, and she is much better able to answer more detailed questions, so I might defer.
Okay, maybe just before we get there, this says pilot program. That's where I kind of got stumped too. But now we'll go to Misty. She probably has all the answers, but I didn't want to throw that out there if she wasn't the one.
Thank you so much for your great question, Madam Chair.
Yes, please go ahead.
So Board Member Rankin, thank you for your great question. And you are correct in that this is part of the adult education program, which is part of CDE, and it is workforce focused, and it is focused on adults without a high school diploma, as Ms. Oakes said. One of the things that makes this program a bit unique is that it focuses on getting adults a high school diploma or credentials with the goal of them having either a job or a better job in the workforce. So that could look like having moving from hospitality to, say, IT in this moment in our economy as that evolves. You're correct in that it's a pilot, in that to the 1920 year was the first year. It is scheduled to be a 5-year pilot with the legislature's potential renewal. So as Ms. Oakes mentioned earlier, we have seen a good amount of interest in this program in $1.8 million request from $1 million.
So can I follow up? So this really is part of the adult ed program, but this pilot specifically talks about people that already have a job and need to have a diploma to get to the next level. Is that correct?
I apologize if I was confusing in my initial response. So it's for people that do not have a job or need a different job to stay employed.
So how does that differ from our regular adult ed? I just don't see the difference in then calling it a pilot program.
That's a great question. So it is part of the services offered through adult education. One of the things that does make this unique, it is for an adult high school diploma versus a GED or another type of test.
Okay.
And that makes a difference potentially in people's economic mobility.
I think you answered my question, because the next one was going to be if an adult came back and just wanted their GED, they would be responsible for that. This is in a different area, and so is adult ed. They just aren't coming back to quickly take a test that this pilot money pays for, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's all good.
Thank you. Board Member Esser?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Board Member Rankin asked my questions really, really well, and Misty answered them really, really well, so I am good. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Escarcega?
Thank you. I think I have a question, just in general, kind of a systems question. I remember watching the meetings when you all discussed all of the potential budget cuts, and then went through an entire list of several things that you ended up cutting. So I think my question is, maybe you can talk to me a little bit about the process you went through to prioritize these four against the other ones that are there, and then kind of the opposite of Member Rankin's question. What if we actually get more money? What are you going to do to decide the priorities for any additional funds? Optimist?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this was not an easy task at all for the department, and I don't think for the state board back in the fall to determine, where to make cuts. But again, we felt that that was necessary and appropriate, that we participated as a department kind of on equal footing with the rest of the state. So it was a tough, effort to go through and prioritize. And really, we wanted to preserve any of the funding that we could that was directly related to students, and especially those most vulnerable students. And so even the areas that were reduced were something that would have a negative impact on the field. You just couldn't make that level of cuts without that. And so a lot of those did focus on, some of those internal staff, thinking that, well, the program would still be out there. We tried to preserve the funding that flowed through to districts to as much as possible, knowing that those staffing would have an impact, because, we do our best to make sure that our efforts are focused on supporting districts and helping them and facilitate them, even if it's on more of the back end, which a couple of these staffing are. But we think that prioritizing this, some of the other ones were programs, again, that didn't meet that level of criteria, that was either newer programs or less facing, and then the operational things will impact CDEs. A large chunk of that is that, but we think that that's appropriate to tighten our belts in, for lack of a better phrase, in these times.
Is that fine?
Yep, I think that's fine for now. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Schaffel?
No further questions, thanks.
Board Member McClellan?
Nothing from me, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Board Member Durham?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Maramba, would you please call the vote? The motion on the floor is to approve the proposed revisions to the fiscal year 21-22 budget.
Board Member Durham.
Yes,
Member Skarziga.
Yes?
Member Esser.
Yes,
Board Member McClellan.
Yes.
Member Rankin.
I would say yes if we don't have a chance to reorder them, but if we do, I would recommend the proposed amendment for it, but overall, I would approve it.
Board Member Shuffle.
I agree with Board Member Rankin, yes.
Board Member Schroeder.
Yes,
So that passes 7-0.
thank you. So Ms. Oakes, are you fine with, as we send that over, reorganizing the items?
Yes.
But not removing any or adding any?
Yes, we will definitely do that. We will provide this to the JBC staff this afternoon, and I will make sure to bring that one to the priority and reflect the discussion here at the board.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you very much. Next item on the agenda, an update on the ESSER II State Reserve and expanded learning opportunities. After the presentation, the board will be asked to vote on the department's intentions for the use of CDE's ESSER II state funds, which approximate $50 million. This will include the plans for the ESSER II state funds proposed specifically for districts to offer expanded learning opportunities. Ms. Pearson, can you provide us with an update?
Sure, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Hold on while I'm not good at doing multiple things at once, and I thought I had my screen set to
Alyssa,
share.
Before
Yeah.
you did that, we did have one other item that it's
Oh, thank
informational
you, yeah.
for the board related to the budget. So is that
Oh,
okay if we finish
yes.
up? I apologize.
Sorry, Ms. Pearson, we'll just go back. I didn't know there was nothing else on my script. Go ahead.
I'm sorry about that. So I will just share this. We did want to just bring up an identified budget need. This is not official, but this is more for your awareness, and that we are having conversations with the JBC staff next week about this. And I can provide a high-level overview. Marsha Bohannon is with us today, and she would be much better able to address any detailed questions than I am. So we are evaluating potential approaches to identify this identified need. It's about $425,000 for CDE's technology, security, and infrastructure. That funding would allow for replacement of our current system, which is an Exadata system, and provide moving that to more of a hybrid cloud approach. We think that the cloud is really the way to go, but also Exadata is going to reach its end of life next February, so in about a year. And we think doing this is more cost effective. Moving to the cloud is more cost effective than replacing the existing site in the current framework, both in terms of one-time costs and ongoing. So there's a lot of cost benefit of moving to this new type of platform. Also, it positions us to to scale up and scale down. So just wanted to let you know that this is something that we're working on because this funding is critical to maintaining our infrastructure.
But it's not part of the funding restoration.
No, it is not. So that is something, this is again, just informational. We are having conversations to raise this awareness, not only with you all today, but again, with the Joint Budget Committee analyst, but it won't be part of the figure setting recommendations that he will be presenting on Monday.
Would this be something that we would vote on ultimately?
Ultimately, depending, right now we're just identifying what are the best ways to address this. And so ultimately, if that is a type of a budget request or something official action, then we would bring that back to you all. But at this point, it's just informational for your just awareness.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me go down the line real quickly. If anybody has questions, Board Member Rankin, do you have any questions?
You just on this, the current one, the Exadata system, is it, is our contract or something up, or is this system archaic now and we're trying to get something? I know you get in the cloud, you're going to be able to save everything, and that's very terrifying to me to have that much information out there. But is this a more robust system for PII and everything else than what we have now?
Madam Chair, can I respond to that?
Oh, yes, please, go ahead.
Thanks. Yes and no, to address your question, Board Member Rankin. The reason we are planning to move to the cloud is, well, for one thing, that's sort of the way everything is going now in the IT world. So like it or not, that's the direction. It also allows us to scale up and scale down. So if we have like short-term needs, we need more capacity. And this is primarily going to impact our data collection systems. So an example would be if we need more capacity for our data pipeline system to increase it for a short period of time, we can do that in the cloud without having to purchase a lot of expensive hardware. And then we can also scale it back. And because it's focused on our data collection systems, it does help with the protection of PII, because that's where we're transmitting data back and forth from the districts to CDE regularly. So we have to make sure that that underlying system, which is the Exadata system, is really robust and up to date. Your initial question about whether it's is the contract up, we are in a contract with a vendor that supports that particular system, and that's what is going to run out in February of 2022. And so at that time, the system is not going to stop working, and it's not like it's really archaic. But at that time, what will happen is we won't be able to go to that vendor and request special help if we need it. We will cease to get updates, which might include security updates. So it is something that we need to address. And there are several different ways of addressing it. The hybrid cloud approach that Ms. Oakes just described, that's one way. We could just replace the whole system with hardware. That would be more expensive. When we did this 6 years ago, it was probably about a $900,000 decision item to put it in there. So that's kind of the difference between the costs, between just replacing it, keeping it on our site, and having people, work on the equipment that we have, versus going to the cloud, where it's just a different model and it's more of a service that is provided. Does that help?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a little follow-up there.
Go right ahead, please.
Ms. Bohannon, is there a name for this system that we're going into, and was this a collaborative decision, or has that even been made, what the company or whatever the platform that we're going with? Do we have a third party, I don't know, conference going on with someone that's really in technology to make sure? And also, is there an endpoint? Is this a 5-year contract, 3-year? Can we revisit this if we need to change later on, because technology is moving quickly?
Madam Chair?
Please, Ms. Bohannon, go ahead.
Yes, we would do an RFP for this particular replacement. So we haven't gotten anywhere near that point yet, because we need to get the funds approved first, obviously. So there's definitely time, to discuss the different options. What we were looking at was the most cost-effective proposal, and our estimate was around $425,000. But we would do more investigation, obviously, about what actually is out there, and the cloud would give us more of an opportunity to adjust, as you say, as technology changes, which it does pretty fast nowadays. That gives us a little more of that flexibility that you're talking about. So that's another reason why we're kind of looking at that as an option.
Thank you, Madam Chair, that's all.
Okay. Board Member Esser?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No questions.
Thank you. Board Member Skarsika?
Thank you. I just have two quick ones. When would you see about putting an RFP? What would the timeline look like for that? What would your estimation be?
That's a good question. It really gets down to the funding. It really is dependent on when we get approval for some funds. So we couldn't obviously do the RFP until we have.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And my follow-up.
Ms. Bohannon, your speaker just went off, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Good. All right.
I got the answer. That makes sense to me. Maybe the question should be ideally when you would want to put an RFP out, but don't worry, don't answer that. I'm not going to nail you on that. The other kind of curiosity I have just in general, if we do a transition like this, to what extent would the interface with school districts change anything? Would it change anything for school districts running their systems, et cetera? Or would it be a pretty seamless change?
Yeah, in this case, that would be seamless from the district's perspective. Until and when we get to the point where we actually change something in our data collection system, they would not see a difference.
Okay.
Hopefully they would see better performance.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
Board Member Sheffel, do you have any questions?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Board Member McClellan?
Nothing from me, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Board Member Durham?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. I think now we're ready. This is not a voting item, so I think we're ready to move on to item 3.02, which is the ESSER II funds. Ms. Pearson, are you ready to talk about the $50 million extended learning opportunities for our kids?
I am, thank you. And thank you, Ms. Oakes. That was great timing for me to be able to get all set to share my screen. Can you all see PowerPoint, blue background? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. So today, if I can change the slides, there we go. We're going to do a few things today. Our purpose is to determine State Board of Education support for the proposed ESSER II state level activities, and specifically the plans for creating expanded learning opportunities. We're going to talk to you a little bit about the resources available, kind of reground in that, then talk a little bit about the opportunities that exist to address needs, and finally talk about next steps and get your board vote on the direction that we should go in. And also Jennifer Oakes and Dr. Colesman, Melissa Colesman are here today too, and they're on standby. They've got great information if we need their great expertise. So resources available. You've seen this from the two of them before, I think. We don't need to go into deep depth about it. It's the federal funding that we've received to date based on COVID. We're talking today about, I don't know if you all can see my mouse. Does that show up? This section under here under CRRSA from December, down at the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds. We call it affectionately for short ESSER II. And there was a total of about $519 million for Colorado in that. So that's what we're talking about today. This will show you a little bit in more detail the breakdown of that $519 million. So $467 million of that goes out directly to local education agencies through the Title I formula. That application opened in the middle of February. Our team's amazing and got that open and available to districts right away. We've already had, as of Wednesday this week, we already had 17 districts that have applied for their funding. So there's a lot of money going out the door that can be used for any of the title programs, any IDEA programs, learning loss, building needs, infrastructure needs for ESSER. So there's a large pot there. What we want to talk with you all in more detail about today is the $51.9 million for state level activities. There's about 0.5% of that for state administration, and the rest is for state level activities. And you heard a little bit last month from, or 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, from Dr. Coltman and Ms. Oakes about that. And we just want to go into a teeny bit more detail. Mainly the difference is that we have dollar amounts in here, approximate dollar amounts, and check and make sure this is still in alignment with what you all are thinking makes sense with that funding. So the first area for use that we're proposing for the state reserve is for funding gap support. I think we did the same thing with ESSER 1 to look at districts that may not get Title I or get very small amounts of Title I, our tribes, our BOCES and AUs that are serving special education students. So we're just trying to look at where there's high need students and if there's anything that formula we need to adjust. So we're proposing about $11.3 million to do that, to meet those student needs, kind of even out that distribution. And we think that money can get to our LEAs pretty quickly. The next area we're looking at is the expanded learning opportunities, and we're looking at putting about $34 million there. And we'll go into more depth on these in a few slides, but to start with, we're looking at two components of that. One, to send funding to districts for expanded learning opportunities, and we'll get into details of how in a little bit, but that would be for district discretion. And then the next part is to support our district and district community partnerships for expanded learning time. So we have an existing program called 21st Century Learning Centers. It's a federal grant program. It's been in existence about 30 years now, where schools and school districts can partner with community organizations or they can run it themselves to do before and after school, or summer enrichment. And in Colorado, we've been doing a lot of fifth aid programs as well. So it's a way to just build a little bit more capacity. We know our districts are completely maxed out right now. And it's a way that if they want to work with partner organizations in the community to get a little bit more capacity to support expanded learning opportunities, that's there for that. And we have an RFP for that out right now, just the regular federal cycle. That's going on right now. So we're in process. And finally, the last big component is some statewide capacity building. We thought it was really important for us to think about with the state reserve funds, what kind of capacity or role can we play at the state level that can support all of our districts so our districts don't have to do one-offs. There's a lot of things that need to be unique to communities, and then we think there's a few things that we're seeing as statewide needs that we can support from the department perspective. And so some funding, you all have heard it loud and clear, the workforce struggles, especially with substitutes and teachers. So we want to do some work on workforce recruitment, strengthening teacher pipeline, that kind of work. And then also just the online coursework support so that we've got that capacity across the state if districts want to take advantage of it to use our statewide online course offerings. So that's high level on those. And then we want to move from there into a little bit talking more detailed in the expanded learning opportunities. So a little context first of how we're looking at the impact of COVID on learning for students. We believe that recovery from learning opportunity loss isn't a quick fix. And it's going to take time. It's going to be more than just the summer. The summer will be important and helpful, but it's going to be long-term for some students. Also, not all students are impacted in the same way. We know it's going to be really individual. There's some kids out there, and we don't know how many right now, but some that this past year or so has been great. They really liked online learning, or they liked the smaller classes, and it's worked really well. It's probably not the majority of our kids, but we just know kids are going to be impacted in different ways from this time. We also know that a lot of our students weren't at grade level or being able to meet the academic standards before the pandemic. We know we've had some historic achievement gaps and opportunity gaps, and so we want to keep that in mind as we think about what we need to do coming out of this. We also know that many of our rural districts have been conducting in-person learning all year. They've had interruptions. Clearly, everybody's had quarantines here or there, and things are a little different in school, but we also know some of our districts have really been able to operate closer to normal this school year. And we know there's workforce issues like we just talked about, both short-term and longer term to think about. And finally, we know that ESSER 2 money can be used through September 2023. So we know that we've got some time. We know that there's going to be a long road for recovery and thinking about it. And we also know we have funding available that will last that long to be able to spend it. So just a little context of how we've been thinking about expanded learning opportunities. So I want to take a moment and talk about right now what's already happening in terms of creating expanded learning opportunities and helping support our student needs. Some of our districts have already started providing supplemental tutoring for students. Some are doing it after school, some are taking their 5th day. They've already put things into place to start addressing needs that they're seeing pop up for students. We know that districts are including budget items for summer school in their ESSER2 applications for it. So in that almost $470 million, we're already seeing districts put in applications and start planning for what to do for the summer. CDE is developing a COVID impacts toolkit for districts for resources to provide expanded learning opportunities. So we're thinking about from where we sit at CDE, what our role can be, again, that statewide capacity, what can we pull together to provide support? So we're working on that. Dr. Colesman and Dr. Hannaford are deep into that work with our team at CDE and pulling things together. Like we talked about, we've got the RFP for the 21st Century Learning Centers already open. Colorado State Libraries and our public libraries across the state are preparing deeply for summer learning. I think you all have probably seen every year they do the wonderful summer reading program, and they're going even deeper for this year. They've been really creative all throughout the pandemic about what remote virtual things can be done, what remote make and take activities, what kind of summer in-person or outdoor activities, learning opportunities they can create. So our libraries are a great partner in this as well. And finally, Colorado Education Initiative has been coordinating with partners across the state to work on contributions to summer 2021 activities. So we just wanted to ground in the work that we know of, and there's probably a lot more than what's on that slide as well, that we know that's already happening to think about this summer. So in the coming months, we're going to talk about what we're thinking about with the ESSER2 State Reserve Expanded Learning Opportunity Funding. We've been working on trying to think about, with that $30-some million, what that would look like to get that to districts. How do we figure out who needs it the most and prioritize who needs it the most, and what those expanded learning opportunities would look like. So we've been talking about if there's a way to do some pre-qualification of districts for eligibility and look at some factors like time in person or disrupted time during the school year, how much students have been remote as a whole district, and look at that as one factor. Look at historic academic performance as another factor, knowing that some districts and schools went into the pandemic having more struggles for helping their students reach grade levels than others. So that is a priority. And then looking at demographics, we just know students with disabilities, our English learners, this disruptive time is really hard for them. So districts with higher populations in those areas would get a higher eligibility or higher prioritization. So if we can do that and pre-qualify some districts and say, look, you all, we know you have the greatest needs here. We're going to set aside money for you. We'd like you to submit this application, but this money is here for you if you meet the requirements in the application. So it takes that, you all have heard this, you all have expressed it a lot too, the competitive grant concerns around, are we really helping those who need it the most, or are we rewarding the ones that can hire a grant writer, who have the best grant writers? So trying to get at that. That said, I think in the pre-qualification, we won't have data on everybody, and there will be people whose academic needs have increased over this time. Schools and districts that have been more remote or more disrupted than what the data that we have reflects. So we'd also want districts to be in schools to be able to apply that meet this criteria, that have those high needs as well. And so we'd want to make sure there was space for that. So that's kind of the eligibility piece of it. Another part that we've come to as we've been thinking through this is we don't think there is one statewide solution. We don't think like everybody should do summer school or everybody should do tutoring next year, or everybody should do after school. We think it's really dependent on what a community needs and what will work for a community. I think in some communities, people are going to be ready to go this summer, and others, people may need just teachers, students, everybody might just need to take a step away from school for a little bit, but they're going to be ready for a 5th day program next year. So a component for us is that it's really important that what gets proposed is co-design with teachers, with parents, with students. So we know that that we're trying to reach are most ready and willing to engage, and that this will meet their needs. So we're working on that. There will be an application process is what we think, but we don't want it to be too involved. We want a description, understanding of what the program is that they're applying for, how that's been co-designed, and just get that background piece of it. And then we've heard from you all about the importance of reporting and evaluation and really being able to understand the return on investment of these different options and different ways to expand learning opportunities for students. So there would be some requirements around reporting and evaluation on students that participated in the program. So that's what we're thinking in terms of the expanded learning opportunities. We also know that there's potential ESSER 3, for lack of a better way to call it, that may come. Maybe we've heard middle March that might be available or maybe getting finalized at the federal level. And then we also know there's a lot of conversations around state initiatives. So what we're trying to do is bring some coherence to all of these things over the next few months too. We know you all have talked about it a lot, all the different grant programs that we have that are working towards similar goals, but maybe not quite exactly, and how hard that is for districts to navigate, and what kind of administrative burden that is. So we're trying to think about how we can pull those things together and be a little bit more cohesive and coherent and save our districts time as they're trying to figure out how to support students in expanded learning opportunities. And we've talked about this a little bit, but I just again want to reiterate, we're really working hard on coordination with the legislature. There's a bill on high dosage tutoring, or an idea for a bill on high dosage tutoring. There's a bill that's been introduced on fifth day programs. We've heard talk of some other ones. So we're really trying to work together to think about how this can be cohesive. Governor's office, some of the GEAR awardees, they're working on summer and summer recovery, especially around reading. So we want to make sure we're learning from them and can connect things that way. There may also be future GEAR funding that we want to coordinate on. We've also been working with the Lieutenant Governor's office. They run the state's AmeriCorps program, and they're really thinking and seeing AmeriCorps as a great way to support workforce capacity in the state, with a secondary goal of also helping with teacher pipeline. So we're working with them to figure out how best we can leverage AmeriCorps and think about that capacity to support our students. So we're working with districts to get a better understanding of what that could look like. I think you all know one of our core tenets in this has been around making sure our highest needs students have our highest quality educators working with them. So we want to make sure that we keep true to that and also figure out how we can do some AmeriCorps workforce capacity. And finally, we've been working with help from CEI, just connecting with philanthropy and nonprofits and community partners to understand that this is statewide support that's needed for our communities and students as we move forward. So next steps, and then I'll stop talking. I feel like I've been talking a long time, I'm sorry. So today we want to determine where the board's support is for this, if this makes sense to you all, if you have adjustments or questions or things you would like us to do differently. Throughout March, we'll be coordinating with the legislature to work on community needs and promote coherence. We've got some meetings with legislators set up, town hall with them set up to be able to really start talking about where you all are at with this, where we're thinking of going, and how do we make coherence and make sense out of all the different great intentions that are coming to support our students. And finally, ongoing, we're going to keep working with our partners like AmeriCorps and Library and CEI. And we'll continue with supporting our districts and schools with information and resources to address learning impacts through that toolkit that we'll have online. So I'll stop talking now, let you all talk and ask questions and go where you want.
Thank you, Ms. Pearson. So before we have a discussion, I would like to entertain a motion, please.
Should have had that in front of me, Madam Chair. I apologize. I'm scrambling for it now.
It's okay.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the proposed allocations for the ESSER 2 state reserve funds, including the plan for supporting expanded learning opportunities.
Thank you. That's a proper motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, I will go down the line. Please ask questions, make comments, etc. Board Member Rankin?
You always come after me first.
Always? You have to talk to Ms. Maramba because she makes this list for me.
I
I'm
see.
supposed to be scrambling it, but
My question, Ms. Pearson, is how does this differ from ESSER 1 and ESSER 3, or are we just continuing? Is it pretty much the same idea and the same type of application process, and did we create it?
Sure. Melissa Colesman, would you like to talk a little bit more? ESSER 1, ESSER 3.
Sure. Madam Chair, Board Member Rankin, the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 fund use is largely the same. There's more of an emphasis in ESSER 2 on addressing learning loss due to COVID. While those funds could be used in ESSER 1 for supporting learning loss, ESSER 2 is really largely focused on that. Regarding ESSER 3, just looking at the draft bill, it seems that there is still an even greater emphasis on addressing learning loss than in ESSER 2. I'm actually designating a portion of funds for those types of activities rather than just an encouragement, but again, that's still in draft form. And the applications for ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 for local education agencies in Colorado was developed by us. We worked really hard to make sure we struck the right balance between an ease of submitting those applications and then also making sure that all of the assurances that are required were included in the application, as well as an opportunity for districts to continue to revise their budgets as time goes on to adjust to the current needs that they're seeing.
Thank you. And I have, Madam Chair, I have one more concern, actually, and that is we talk about the community a lot here, and I think we need to define what our responsibilities are and what a community's responsibilities are before we spend money paying community to do what our job is. And I can see where that could be blurred, especially when schools have said we only need 4 days and now they get money because now they can come back a 5th day. I have a lot of questions about that. So if you could address that or address how we're going to talk about that when it comes before us, or maybe you already, and maybe it's in the application. So please talk to me about that.
Sure, Madam Chair.
yes, go ahead.
I think those are conversations we should continue to have, and I'm happy. I'll follow up with you. I don't think there's anything in our application right now that in our proposal right now that has us so far down a path that we can't adjust as we have further conversations. I think one thing we're trying to do also is share with our community organizations that not so much from we have money place at all, but you all have resources. Can you come forward and help support our students? Because it's going to take a whole community. It's like it's taken during all of the pandemic. It's going to take a whole community to support our kids and what their needs are. But I would love to talk further with you, Board Member Rankin, just so I can better understand what you're saying and think through how we address that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Esser?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple of questions. Ms. Pearson, the first thing to follow up with what Board Member Rankin said, the ESSER funds, and I do like that name.
I bet you do.
They would not just go to a community organization that says we're going to do tutoring for the kids in our neighborhood, correct? They have to partner with the district.
So for the ESSER State Reserve Funds, and let me go, that we're dedicating to expanded learning opportunities. The majority of those are going to go through school districts. Through the application process, districts would apply for that. If a district chose, they say, there's this great tutoring program we believe in, that's what the district chose, I think they could go and do that work. The small amount that we're saving for 21st Century Learning Centers, those are partnerships between school districts and community organizations. So usually the majority of them are run by the school districts, and they, again, pull in a community organization. There's a whole lot of assurances and information that any community organization needs to sign that they're doing the work. There's some instances where the community organizations are the grantees in partnership with the school district. Again, there's a lot of assurances and financial reviews that they need to meet in order to be able to be given the funding. So it's really robust. It's a long grant history, and it's really robust process. So it's not any community organization off the street could say, hey, we want to help some kids, which is great. We want help for kids, but that's not where this money is going.
So I'm pleading for cohesion in this huge funding effort. The other question I have is I applaud the department for wanting to make sure they can recruit more teachers, develop a pipeline, work with subs. What have you got in mind to retain teachers? I mean, the Denver Post and Chalkbeat just put out that report that up to 40% of our teachers want to retire or leave the profession. That's a lot of recruiting.
That is, yes.
So how do we retain these teachers?
That's a wonderful question. Colleen, if you want to pop in, feel free, turn on your video and jump in. I would just say, in terms of thinking about the application process, part of why it's so important to us that teachers are part of that design is just for that. Like, I think a lot of teachers, at least my teacher friends, are exhausted and need some recovery time this summer, like personal recovery. And I don't know that they're ready to jump in and start doing tutoring or small group or summer school. Some may be, but I think a lot would like to take a little break. And so things like that, that's why it's really important to us that teacher voice is part of that design, so that we're not forcing our teachers, not forcing them, but strongly encouraging them to come in the summer when they really need a break before the school year starts next year. Colleen, what would you add?
That was a great addition, and I think that's really where we're focused, is trying to alleviate some of the pressure that continues to build around our educators by offering some additional supports. And that's really where we're looking to enhance the workforce so that we can loosen some of those pressure valves, or at least allow the districts to loosen those pressure valves. And I think those are our critical intersection points. And then also providing the relief through, and this was not something that we talked about a lot before the pandemic, but providing relief through our substitute programs to make sure that when teachers are ill, they're not coming to school trying to carry that burden. When teachers need time off to take care of other things that are integral to their health and their own safety, that they have someone to step into their classroom. And so those are the points that we think we have good leverage on. And then, of course, encouraging our districts to utilize these funds in ways that are very meaningful and collaborative with their workforce. So I think those are our largest targets to date.
Thank you, Dr. O'Neill. And I do have a couple of other questions. I know Michigan is actually doing a hazard pay for teachers. I'm sure we haven't considered that. And then there have been groups that have asked if they can apply for recertification by using the learning they've had in providing online classes, hybrid classes. It was all new. They've had to take many different courses on how to perform this well. So I was wondering about that as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm happy. I'm not sure I can answer the hazard pay one right off the top of my head, as that I think they ended up with state funding to do the support around hazard pay. And so we would have to think about that from an ESSER perspective. I don't know about the allowability of that, but I do know from a professional development standpoint, we want to encourage every teacher. There has been such a learning curve to utilize the learning that they have this year for their renewal period. So as they think about renewing their professional license, absolutely allowable under the Board of Education statute or the Board of Education rules. And so we would encourage them to bring that forward when they do their renewal process with us, for sure. So thank you for bringing that up. I think that's an important point for folks.
Yeah, thank you. That's excellent. Thank you, Dr. O'Neill and Ms. Pearson, and thank you, Chairwoman Schroeder.
Thank you. Board Member Escarzica.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this may be for Melissa and for both you and Alyssa, but I'm trying to get a sense a little bit of the process and timing. And so when I'm looking at, I have the areas, I understand the buckets that you've proposed. And then when it says in the incoming months, these are potentially some things co-designed by the community, et cetera. Then you have the potential for ESSER 3 funds. Then you list potential state initiatives, right? I'm assuming because they're in the legislature right now, there's potential bills. I guess one, does that bullet mean that this plan or whatever you have could potentially change based on some potential legislation that might come forward asking for some of this money? Or are you asking us to, and with that, you made a comment that said we're not so far down the road that we can't make changes. And so I guess I'm wondering, so exactly what am I voting on today and how solid is that? And what's the flexibility going forward to change it? Yep.
Awesome question. Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
let's see. In terms of timeline, we are trying to ascertain if districts need additional funding from that almost 470 million for this summer. And that's going to be a big decision point. If districts have with their LEA funding what they need, then I think we would like to be a little bit thoughtful, make sure we can be coherent in what comes out from the ledge session, or at least is emerging from the ledge session, and go from there. If districts need additional resources right now to get going for the summer, then we want to figure out how to get them what they need for the summer. So we're working on that. We're going to have those conversations next week. In terms of how baked it is and how much we can change, I think what we're asking you for today is, does this generally make sense, especially the allocations, the approximate allocations for the money? And if there are concerns or thoughts about the role of community organizations and how we're talking about it, or the application process, that I think there's room to adjust, and we would love to hear from you all on that. So I think it's more of this global, does this seem like the right direction we're headed in? Not that we have everything exactly lined up. Is that?
Yeah, so I'm voting on based on what we know today.
Yes, that's a great way.
Moment, does this look like the right direction? But if something else comes up, you all have the ability to change. This isn't locked in. Okay, that really helps my my understanding. And then just kind of a curiosity question. I think I know the answer, but as I'm going through here and thinking about that evaluation or the application process, I'm trying to envision under what circumstances you might actually decline somebody. And as I think about it, it's probably only if they won't do the assurance around, as long as they were within the buckets and as long as they sign the assurances, that should be pretty much it, right? You're trying to really make this short and simple.
Yes, I think we want, I think the only other thing is if we run out of money, right? We're going to have to prioritize and be really thoughtful about how we're prioritizing.
Okay.
But if we run out of money, but the intention is, we have these core tenets about what we think are important for expanded learning opportunities. If there's a school or district with high need based on our eligibility that meets those, we would like to get them there. And again, just like you said, aligned with the assurances, as long as those assurances work for them.
All right. Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Board Member Scheffel? Board Member Scheffel? I'll go back to her. Board Member McClellan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have further questions, but this plan looks good to me, and I'm particularly gratified that staff has touched on the outreach efforts that they've made And I'm really gratified to see capacity building included here. I think that's really smart and a good reflection of the input that you got. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Board Member Durham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just would observe, I think it's important to keep in mind the legislature has no authority to appropriate these funds or to direct our spending of them. So I think if the legislature should appropriate its own money for some of the things that we have prioritized, we might want to be flexible enough to move some of our funds to other priorities. I think that it is important just to keep in mind the prerogatives here and who has them and why they exist the way they do. So I think the plan's generally a good one. I'm a little. I do agree that capacity building is a need. I think it's a really difficult thing to do, and I would hate to see us throw a lot of resources at that unless there's some indication that the plan we have actually works. So maybe it ought to be phased in a little bit, because I'm not sure that I have heard any or have seen any capacity building plan that I believe has any real chance of working. So unless there's something awfully novel out there, without some proof case that the money, that we're not throwing good money after bad.
Thank you. I'm trying to get a bigger picture of what it is that we're doing, what we have done, what we want to do now, and where we want to go in the future. Am I correct in thinking that most of ESSER 1 was about creating safe environments for students in order to get our schools open, or providing devices for kids, etc.? Sort of the I think I'm thinking about the mechanics of how to deal with this. Is that a fair picture? I think we ought to be able to talk to our voters about what we're doing with all this money, and it seems to me it'd be helpful if we could articulate what we're doing, what we have done, and what we are doing now.
So, Madam Chair, I think you are right that ESSER 1 really was very much used and is continuing to be used, because those dollars can be expended through September of 2022, but really focus on those immediate needs. Also, the Coronavirus Relief Fund as well, that expired in December, was a lot of HVAC systems and devices for kids. So all of those immediate needs. Some of those immediate needs continue, of course, but the ESSER 2 does start to switch over to addressing the kind of the long-term impacts of the pandemic on learning opportunities for kids. And again, like I said, I just noticed an even greater emphasis in the draft for the next stimulus package on that. So it seems like there's a shift over to that recognition.
Well, that's helpful. So if we talk about ESSER 2, we are starting to talk about the needs that we are identifying for what kids have lost or what they need. And so as part of that, I think we'd probably want to ask districts to share whatever information they have about that. And then I think when we get to ESSER 3, even more so. You have learning loss identified a little bit more based on the information that you have on what's happening for your kids, or based on the needs that you have for your staffing. I mean, I don't think it's clear to me this is not only for serving students, but it's also for helping our teachers continue, improve, recover, etc. I think what I'm asking is for some identification of what's the big picture, so that we can speak to our constituents when they talk about, boy, this is a lot of money that you're getting, what's happening with it. I think we need to be able to answer that question to the extent that we can, without, I'm not asking for super detail, but to make that, to share with our superintendents that that's a question that we all have to be able to answer to our constituents. And I don't know what the feds are asking for in terms of what did you do and how did you use it, but I'm glad they're providing the guidelines for the applications, and then they're getting that they're getting more specific about meeting student and faculty needs as opposed to the technical stuff that we have. How far behind are we still on devices and on hotspots and that sort of stuff? Is that still a big problem? Do you know, Ms. Pearson or Ms. Colesman?
Madam Chair, we do not have any new updated data since that October needs inventory, at least statewide that I'm aware of. If somebody else on our team knows more, please jump in. We do know that the majority of our students in the state are in person at this point, or hybrid in person. So clearly hybrid, you still need to have devices, but I think we've got almost all of our districts have been back in person over the last month. I think we're at almost 96% of students at least having some in-person time. So I think the needs on a regular basis, clearly we've got quarantines, you've got all those things that come up, but I think the needs for so many kids remote have decreased a little bit because everybody's done such a great job transitioning back.
It would seem to me that this would be a more appropriate concern for the legislature to address, to the extent that we don't have, that our kids can't get online. That's an ongoing issue. That's not just a COVID issue. So ideally, we wouldn't need to spend more of these funds on that, but I don't think it's over. And I think as we talk about lessons learned, I think we are going to find that hybrid, for example, is pretty popular. If you want to be able to use the time from snow days, you've still got to solve the same problem that we had when we started all this last March. So I hope that becomes a discussion item. Any other comments or questions, colleagues? Are we ready for a vote? Ms. Maramba, would you call for a vote, please?
Okay. Board Member Durham?
Yes.
Board Member Skarzikas?
Yes.
Board Member Usser?
Yes.
Board Member McClellan?
Yes.
Board Member Rankin?
Yes.
Board Member Shuffle?
Yes.
Board Member Schroeder?
Yes.
That passes 7-0.
Thank you. Board Member Sheffel, we lost you the last time. Were there any comments that you wanted to make?
No, I appreciate it. I was kind of transitioning, but I would really just kind of second your comments, which is, you know, you get comments from teachers and parents about where's the money and did it help my kid, and the kids in our school have better instructional opportunity. And so to the extent that we can answer that question in the affirmative, that's always really helpful because people feel like, gee, you got a lot of money. Where is it?
Great. Thank you. All right, our next item is federal waivers for assessment and accountability requirements within ESSA. While we're here today, I'd like to discuss two federal waivers. We know time is of essence, given the schedule for our state assessments and the requirements for public comment for federal waivers. However, first, I'd like to request that we waive federal accountability requirements under ESSA. And secondly, to request to waive section 1111B2B5 of ESSA to allow suspension of the CMAS and co-alt science testing grades 5, 8, and 11 for spring of 2021, thereby administrating a shorter version of our Colorado statewide assessments. Let's take these up as two separate items. So I'd like to start and ask Ms. Colesman to provide a brief update on the federal guidance concerning the accountability waivers.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. On Monday, the U.S. Department of Education sent a letter to states regarding assessment, accountability, and reporting systems for the 21 the 2020-2021 school year. The letter invites states to request a waiver for the 2020-2021 school year of the accountability and school identification requirements of the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. With this waiver, a state would not be required to implement and report the results of its accountability system. The waiver would also explicitly include waiving the 95% assessment participation requirement for ESSA. Further, the state would not be required to identify schools for support based on the data from the 2020-21 school year. And each state that receives the accountability and school identification waivers would be required to continue to support previously identified schools, resume school identification in the fall of 2022, and ensure transparency to students and the public, including public reporting of percentages of students not assessed, disaggregated by student subgroup. Right now, we know that the department will be providing a waiver template that states may use. Once we see the template and the accompanying frequently asked questions, we'll have a better sense of the details that were not included in the letter from the feds. A waiver such as this would be consistent with what the board has expressed regarding the use of state assessment data with respect to state accountability. So we're again awaiting further information from the feds on this waiver possibility.
Thank you. Mr. Durham, do you have a question?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Not a question, but in light of the fact that I think we're expecting more information from the federal government, I think it may be advisable to wait to vote on this particular item, actually on both these items until we actually have that template to make sure that we're seeking what we have reason to believe might be granted, and that we're doing it in a way consistent with really all of our values and what we're looking at. And we may have more information. Our board meeting is now about 10 days away, I think, give or take, 12 days away.
Well,
yeah, and I think if we might be able to wait 2 weeks. If we have some reason to expect we might get this information reasonably soon, or we'll know more by the board meeting, I think we could ask then at that point in time, and we'd still have time to make appropriate adjustments on these two on this particular test. So I think I would recommend that we delay this this formal action for a while, recognizing that we're very likely to end up in this spot, but we could be in a better place if we wait a little bit.
You're talking about the science test?
Yes.
About waiving the science test, okay.
Actually, the other waiver as well, if we're going to get.
Yeah, both of the waivers.
Right, yes.
Ms. Colesman, did you talk about the science test?
No, we're separating out our presentation of this between accountability waiver and assessment waiver because they really are different issues. They're not contingent upon each other. And so that's why we thought even having two different people talk would help even distinguish further which item we're talking about.
Okay. So if based on what we know so far, we are likely to be granted a waiver from accountability based on everything we've read. It does give some guidance on what we need to do for the schools that we already have on our clock. And that's roughly what we're talking about.
That's correct.
And we're waiting for some more guidance.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. Second item. Well, actually, shall we discuss this first, colleagues? Do any of you have any concerns? Oh, Ms. McClellan, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to concur. I want to make sure that because we have dollars attached to our compliance, and this is a matter of legal compliance, I agree with Mr. Durham that getting clarification, federal clarification is really vital before we put our board in a position to vote where we may not be clear about the consequences legally and with respect to funding that is attached to our compliance. So I appreciate him jumping in, and I just wanted to back him up on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Skarzica.
Thank you. I don't disagree with that recommendation. I have a question around process, because I know there was some questions around input, right? There's a requirement inside the waiver that you have to do this community input. Is it the same to ask for the waiver around accountability? Does that require the same kind of community input process as a waiver, say, for science?
Madam Chair?
Go ahead, Ms. Tolzman.
Yes, there are requirements around any type of waiver associated with ESSA. So those requirements for public posting and public comment period would apply to this particular waiver as well. What's different about this waiver from just a general waiver is that it looks like the feds are putting together a streamlined or simplified process for requesting the waiver. They did this last spring as well with the both accountability and assessment. They were very simple processes. And so it's unclear whether or not they will adjust any of the timeline requirements regarding the public input, but it's clear that they still will require public input.
Okay, thank you. I do have a technical question maybe when we get to, I don't know if we're going to talk about that Attorney General letter. I just have a question about probably a technical legal question on that. But other than that, I'm good at this point.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Rankin, do you have any questions?
No, Madam Chair. I thought I did, but if we're going to postpone, that's fine.
Yeah, we're not going to vote today. Board Member Esser?
I do have a few constituent questions. They're reaching out, and I believe some districts are telling parents if they want to opt out, they have until today. So if we put everything off, does that cause districts some deadline issues? And I don't know if that's Dr. Coleman or Ms. Pearson.
I would say actually it's Mr. Kowski can take that when we're ready to go. When you all are ready to go to the assessment conversation, she can help with that.
This is not the assessment. This is the accountability piece. So
okay.
I'll be sure to call on you when we are on the other one. And Board Member Shuffle, do you have any questions about getting a waiver for accountability for ESSA? Okay, so now let's talk about the, oh, are you there? Board Member Shuffle? Let's talk about the suspension of the science test, please.
Madam Chair, this is Joyce Zerkowski. I am wondering if it might be helpful for me to walk through the guidance in general in reference to assessment, or whether you would prefer for me to narrow specifically to science.
Might be good to go general, because I'm not sure they actually mentioned science. Did they?
No. They do not specifically reference science. So if it is all right with you, I'm going to go from a high level in terms of the overall assessment guidance. And you, of course, will let me know if I'm getting into too much detail or I'm not addressing the topics that you are most concerned with.
Go ahead.
All right. So as we look at the guidance that was referenced earlier from the U.S. Department of Education, they refer to their ongoing commitment to supporting all states in assessing the learning of all students. That is a premise of ESSA, and the department re-emphasized that within this guidance. With an eye to equity, they reiterated their position that parents and educators and the public must have access to data on student learning. Parents should be provided information on how their students are doing. I know that this board has had conversations about the varieties of different types of data that parents do have access to. Again, in this guidance, the department talks about that statewide assessment information. The guidelines reflect an urgency to provide information on the achievement of students and to understand the impact of COVID, which right now a lot of experts are expecting for that impact to not be equal across all students or student groups. As Dr. Klosman indicated, the intent for this guidance and for the assessment's results are not for high stakes accountability, but to assist in the targeting of resources and supports by states, districts, and schools. Given all of that, the department is not inviting what they refer to as blanket assessment waivers. I would suggest that the blanket assessment waivers are consistent with what they provided last year, which covered all of the federally required assessments. They did refer to flexibility options regarding administering shortened tests, offering remote administration, and extending the testing window, potentially even into the summer or the fall. CDE explored those options of shortened tests and offering remote administration throughout much of last summer and the fall with our local and national technical advisors, as well as our vendors. And we have also been connecting with other states on a very consistent basis to try to learn from one another in terms of how we approach assessment in obviously a very different time. Looking first at shortening the assessments, bottom line was we weren't able to shorten those assessments, the individual ELA assessment or the individual math assessment, enough to make a meaningful difference. If we would shorten the assessments significantly, we wouldn't be able to have interpretable scores based on content coverage, performance level descriptions, or the cut scores. As we have been talking to folks, one of the options that was initially introduced was eliminating the writing portion of the ELA assessment. And based on conversations, that is just a fundamental change of the assessment in what we are measuring, creating technical difficulties, but more importantly, creating those interpretation and use challenges. Again, to get rid of that would be a fundamental change in the assessment, not just a shortening of the assessment. In terms of remote administration, as we engaged in conversations and also heard from districts, there were equity concerns in terms of device and internet access, and I believe you discussed some of that earlier today, the condition of internet access in the state of Colorado. There were equity issues in terms of access to paper-based and teacher-supported accommodations for our students with disabilities and English learners. It became clear relatively early on that to provide remote assessment would also add additional burden, not just for our districts, but also for our parents. As we considered standardized administration and comparability of scores, picture testing within a classroom, what that experience is like, versus taking a test at home. Students could experience either a disadvantage in testing or an advantage that could influence the performance. So again, as we picture a student testing at home, we know that when we have students who are at home, we have families of students who are at home. So there potentially could be an 8th grader being interrupted by her 4-year-old sister repeatedly as she's trying to complete the 8th grade math assignment. Or what we could have is our students who have access to materials and support that give them an advantage. And in the end, the results don't really represent independent performance. One of the ways that some states and some programs are trying to address that issue of standardized administration is they are requiring video for student cameras to be on so that teachers, potentially the state, potentially the vendors could actually see how the students were engaging with the test. Given Colorado's concerns about student privacy, I have to admit we found that extremely problematic if that would be a requirement. So in the end, as we started to, not started, but as we were looking at the possibility of remote administrations, the level of increased burden and the use of those scores for statewide purposes, it was deemed not advantageous to the state to move forward with that. Extending the testing window into the summer or even into the fall, keep in mind that CDE, taking into consideration the currently scheduled district closing dates for this school year, CDE has already extended the CMAS testing window through May 14th. Aside from CMAS, I do want to mention that we have increased the number of testing days and options for PSAT and SAT, just as an aside. Commissioner Anthus has shared with the field that should they deem an additional extension as helpful, they should contact the department and we will happily engage in conversation with them about how much of an extension they are seeking, and we'll do our best to respond in a way that meets the district needs. I do want to mention that extending those windows will delay reporting, obviously. At this point, we have not heard from districts or schools. I will also acknowledge that at this point, I'm not sure that schools and districts are considering that in depth. The department has also indicated a willingness to work with states that might need additional flexibility to address their individual needs and conditions while ensuring the maximum statewide data to inform the targeting of resources and supports. Keep in mind that resources and supports can come from local schools and districts, from the state, from the federal level, as well as from other organizations who are invested in education. The guidance does acknowledge the challenges that schools are facing. It reflects that keeping students and staff safe is a priority, stating that it does not believe that if there are places where students are unable to attend school safely in person because of the pandemic, that they should be brought into school buildings for the sole purpose of taking a test. And as Dr. Kolzman mentioned earlier, the guidance does also require, unlike last year, that states solicit public comment and stakeholder input on any waiver request before submitting a waiver request, making this year's process more time intensive. I'm going to circle back to the option of shortening the administration of the, shortening the assessments, and what the department would like to introduce is the possibility of looking at shortening the assessments from a battery perspective. So as we consider the CMAS assessments at 5th grade, there's ELA, English Language Arts, math, and science. Would it be possible, would it be appropriate to shorten the assessments by suspending the science portion of that CMAS battery? Moving in that direction would be consistent with stakeholder, the stakeholder committee that met last fall, their recommendation. It is consistent with previous conversations that this board has had previously. While we want to be sure that we're not conveying that we disvalue science, again, considering prioritizing ELA and math, especially in light of the fact that districts are in the process of implementing the 2020 science standards, and our current science test is still based on the old standards. So there is a mismatch between our assessment and the standards at this point in time. So again, as we consider options for trying to ease the burden of assessment, looking towards science may be something that we want to consider. Questions, comments?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sirkowski. Shall I go down the line, or do you want to put up hands? I saw Mr. Durham's hand up a bit ago.
No, I was, unfortunately, my device overreacted.
Do you have any questions or comments?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, Board Member Esser?
If I could unmute, yes. There are a lot of questions. I just don't know when the most appropriate time is to ask them. So
we're talking about the science test. Should we request a waiver from that particular test in order to reduce the amount of testing that we will engage in this year?
No, I don't have any questions about that right now. Thank you.
Board Member Rankin?
No, I thought the presentation really was very clear on what we've talked about in the past, and so I appreciate that, and I have no questions.
Are you comfortable with the direction we're going in? Do you object to our requesting a waiver should staff want to go through with that?
Well, we're on this testing. We're not on a state waiver, correct?
We're on requesting a, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Pearson, we're requesting a waiver from taking the statewide science test this spring across the state for grades 3, 8, and 11. I hope I have that right.
Madam
Yes,
Chair, I think. Sorry, Board Member Rankin.
Madam Chair, may I take that question?
Yes.
Just for clarification, the CMAS science assessments are administered in grades 5, 8, and 11. And right now, the conversation is about the possibility of Colorado pursuing a waiver solely related to the administration of those science assessments.
Okay, good. So my question, Ms. Rankin, are you comfortable with the department considering that?
I'm very comfortable.
All right. Board Member Escarzaga.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is maybe where my question might come in about input. So as I heard, I think it's Dr. Zukowski. I don't want to blow that if it's not doctor, but when she talked about the stakeholder input, right, even from the committee that came through, that was one of the recommendations in which they agreed upon. Is that then in the view, and this is maybe the technical question, of the requirements of the waiver, there is this input, this community input process. Does that stakeholder group, who did represent the entire state, was set up to do exactly what we wanted to, and that was to give input, does that group technically meet the requirement for the community input, or do we have to redo the whole process? And I think that may be a AG's question.
I apologize.
Madam Chair?
Oh.
Board Member Durham?
Yeah, I don't think that the stakeholder process really affects the legal status of any of the applications for waivers or non-applications for waivers. I think it was designed strictly for input. It didn't carry any binding legal authority with those recommendations. So I don't think there's any legal effect one way or the other of the stakeholder recommendation.
No, I think maybe just, thank you, Madam Chair, if I could, to clarify, I'm not asking do we have to do what they recommended? What I'm asking is could we use that committee's recommendation that they did for science as the community input requirement for this waiver and not have to go through the whole process again? That's my technical question to AG's office.
Mr. Peters.
That is a very creative question, and I'm not sure I'm willing to say yes or no. I think we would want to have a quick chat with the U.S. Department of Education about that and how they would look at it.
Okay,
I like the way you're thinking, though.
thank you. And thank you. I have no further questions.
All right, Board Member McClellan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to contemplating a request for a waiver out of the CMAS science, provided that we have all of the clarification we need with respect to our ability to stay within our lane in terms of compliance, then I'm fine with that direction with respect to the science testing. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Rankin, I think I see your hand up. You're muted.
Sorry about that. If I look back in our discussions from this last year of board meetings and from the commissioner's recommendation, I recall that we continued, the department continued on course. We are going to take these tests. I mean, there was no waiver at all from the commissioner and what we voted on, what we've talked about all along. So I don't know that there would be any cause for anyone to say, oh, technically we were wrong because we don't want to have this test. So I think that we've been very clear in the last year that we are going to have it. It's only recently thrown into the hopper that we aren't going to. So I think a lot of the schools and districts anticipated or should have anticipated. That's just what I wanted to throw out there.
Thank you. I think this is largely in response to what the stakeholder group suggested to us. So, Board Member Sheffel, do you have a comment or question? So I have a question in terms of, we're not voting on this today. There's potentially a 2-week requirement for posting, which would that happen after we vote on it in March, et cetera? My worry is that we might go ahead and apply for this waiver and that we might be turned down. And then and I think this question is for Ms. Zurkowski, where does that leave us then in the whole process of assessment?
Madam Chair, I would like to provide a reminder that in terms of our testing windows, we are opening up our testing windows for online ELA and math assessment in March. So testing windows for science are later. So we do have some extra time.
Okay.
In terms of level of urgency.
Good.
Suggest.
Good. Well, I appreciate that, because I was afraid if we sort of drag our feet at this point, that we might conflict with the plans of school districts. So that is helpful. Any other questions or comments? Board Member Rankin, I don't know. I think we didn't necessarily get a commitment from you to have staff look further into this science. Do you object to it?
No, I'd like to see what the feds say if we get rid of it. Yeah, I was fine with all of it.
Okay, good. Then I think we are through with this conversation, folks. Great, thank you very much. And we'll hope to hear more about this on March 10th. Although I don't remember it being on the agenda. So we need to work on that.
I need to add it.
Might need to add it, exactly. So the next item are legislative items, and I think I see Ms. Mello is here. Ms. Mello, do you want to introduce the topic? We have 2 different bills that we want to talk about briefly.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And in some ways, this is a continuation of the conversation you've been having, because at least one of these bills is highly related to the topic of discussion. If you don't mind, I'd actually rather start with, well, I don't know how to describe that. I'm going to start with the not testing bill one, if that's all right with you all. we have discussed this bill before. This is the legislation that would remove the requirement that Colorado higher education institutions accept a standardized test score as part of the admissions process. So that bill has been introduced, and we discussed it as part of our regular process at our first legislative context meeting on Wednesday. The recommendation at the moment is that we take an amend position. We don't need to vote on that. I think the types of amendments we would be asking for relate to making sure that if students want to submit a score, that's an option for them. And then also making sure that good data is being collected to show that the proponents of the proposal, so the proponents have certain goals they want to achieve with this proposal. And so we think it's reasonable to say, well, look, great, that we hear you. Let's make sure we collect the information to see if it works that way or not. So not presupposing any outcomes, but just saying we have to collect the information in order to even be able to answer the question down the road. So those are that's the big picture conceptual amendments we would be seeking. Has spoken with many of you about this, and more than happy to answer any questions or have whatever level of discussion about this legislation you'd like to have. I mean, I will just remind you that at your this meeting about a month ago, this was the same bill that you guys had a decent conversation about.
Are there any more comments or questions, colleagues, about the SAT bill? Seeing, hearing.
Do you need our, we don't have a position of support or oppose, but we're asking you to actively pursue some improvements to the bill. Is that really, you want a consensus for that? Is that what you're looking for?
Yes, yes. Yeah, we don't need to vote, but if anyone has concerns with that approach, now would be a great time to let us know.
Thank you.
Colleagues? Board Member Rankin?
Yes, we may have answered this before, but I would like to have it answered again, and that is, would this prohibit some colleges or universities, or would this be a blanket across all of them? And do they agree with it? I see that this bill, it's coming to us, it's K-12, but if some universities still want to require it, can they do that? Or does this bill say, no, we're not going to? I need a little clarification.
Madam Chair, may I respond?
Yep.
The bill does not prohibit universities or colleges who want to have those scores be part of the process. It simply removes the mandate that they all look at that. And the bill is pretty largely supported within the higher education community.
Do you know, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Ms. Mello, do you know if they would continue, or when you say that, is that they have it now as a requirement or part of their application and they will continue it, or that we're just going to drop it from everything? What's your feel for that?
I think they wouldn't be bringing the legislation if there probably are some that will drop it altogether, because otherwise, why run the bill? I mean, you don't need to run the bill if you're not wanting to drop that requirement. This makes it an individual institution decision, right? So it's basically like right now the law puts its hand on one side of the scale. This just kind of takes the scale to here and allows institutions to make that decision.
So if an institution made that decision and the student didn't take the test, and now I want to go to this one, I don't understand how that works. Does that make any sense? If a
student chooses to require a standardized test for admission, then a student would have to meet that requirement in order to apply.
I understand that part. But what if they have not taken it in the school, or can you just pay for that kind of a test and take it on your own time?
Yes, you can pay for it and take it on your own time. I mean, we use the generic term standardized test here because we don't put proper names in statute. But for all intents and purposes, what we're talking about here is the SAT and the ACT. I mean, in practical terms, that's what we're discussing.
Thank you.
Any
So
other
are we
concerns?
voting now? Are we voting now, Madam Chair, to decide if we support this legislation or not?
No, the suggestion, Board Member Sheffel, is that we not vote, that we send back a request for an amendment to this bill.
Okay. And what, did you read or do we have the amendment?
We do not. The amendment, I think, is being worked on, but it's about, I believe, getting more information. Ms. Mello, could you clarify that, please?
Yes. So there's two things we'd be seeking to amend in the bill. One is to allow, if a student wants to submit a score, to make that, a possibility, or not a possibility, but if a student wants to submit the score, then they can submit the score. And then to ensure that information is being collected as part of this implementation of this bill, so that we can kind of check and see, once we have enough data, if it's accomplishing its goal.
I don't know, Madam Chair, if this is the time, but I really have issues with this bill. I don't know when we'll discuss it further, but I think it's problematic.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, do you mind if I dialogue?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. That's what we call it at the legislature, when people talk back and forth. I understood that, Board Member Sheffel, and I think the discussion you all had as a board about a month ago made it clear that a number of you have concerns with the bill. This is an attempt to see if we can address some of those concerns, and perhaps not fully in your case. I don't presume to know that whether this fully addresses your concerns or not. I don't know if we'll be able to do it or not. And so when we know what the sponsors say to us, we will come back and need to have another discussion about it. At that point, you all may want to take a position of oppose or support. I mean, I don't know what position you'll want to take, but we're going to, as our legislative protocols call for, we're going to try to work with them first to see if we can address the concerns. So we're letting you all know that that's what we're thinking, that's what the plan is. And again, asking for your input and your questions and concerns about that strategy.
Board Member Sheffel, do you want to have a side conversation later on with Ms. Mello to express some of your concerns if they're different from what we have been saying?
Yeah, that's fine. And I think they are similar to what we've been saying following up to our previous conversation, but I can do that. I think we did kind of discuss it.
Okay. Ms. Mello, would you be good enough to reach out?
Of course.
Thank you, Board Member Sheffel. Anybody else? All right, Ms. Mello, carry on.
Okay.
Wait, I had my hand up, Madam Chair.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I agree with Board Member Sheffel, and I know this sounds kind of strange, but I hate to go into something with amendments because that gives them a chance to have another go at it. But that doesn't mean that we'll all agree, I hope, even if we have that. I mean, I think it's going to be like maybe 2 votes, but I want you to be very firm, Ms. Mello, when you talk to them, where we're coming from, and that not necessarily does this amendment mean we're going to all agree on it.
I hear you. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Madam Chair, may I proceed to talk about our last bill?
Yes.
So probably one of the most controversial bills of the session, and we have 6 minutes to discuss. The good news is, well, maybe good news, I defer to all of you. We are also recommending, your legislative contacts are also recommending an amend position on this bill. So we're not asking today for a vote of support or opposition to the proposal. This is House Bill 1125. It would tell the department to submit a waiver to the federal government to suspend all CMAS testing this school year for the remainder of 2021. It also incorporates some of the other consensus recommendations that came out of the stakeholder group. So there's a few other components to the bill, including the thing that there's pretty widespread agreement on, which is that we're not going to use testing results this year for accountability purposes. So that's also included in the bill. I think the most significant and substantive part of the bill at the moment is the pause on federal testing. We got new information this week. You guys have just had a great conversation about the federal guidance and what that may or may not mean. So that has certainly come into this conversation at the Capitol now. Recognizing that there are, I think I'm well aware of each of your feelings about this bill, and I think you all have strong, passionate policy feelings about this bill and respect each and every one of those. Given the newness of the federal guidance, it felt appropriate at this point in time to let the conversation continue to unfold a little bit, let it have some space to breathe, give people some time to assess what this all means, which is why we're recommending the amend position. I don't actually have any specific amendments to talk to you about right now because this is all evolving very, very quickly. Trust me, I'm involved in meetings at the Capitol. It feels like all I do is meet at the Capitol about this bill and then talk to you all. It's a very active conversation, and we won't do a single thing until we obviously come back and talk with the board. But for the moment, well, we will continue to have conversations with people. We won't make any official decisions or determinations. We're recommending the amend position just to give this some time to play out and have a better understanding of where we are.
Thank you. Board Member Esser, you, I think, indicated you had a lot of questions, so let's allow you to.
I do. As this can get kicked down the road for many reasons, I have been contacted by constituents as to what happens if a district has an opt-out date that comes before we know exactly what waivers we're going to request from the feds. So I don't know who would be able to answer that.
Yeah, all I can say is that is definitely not a legislative question. I understand it, and it's a good question. I defer to the appropriate CDE staff person.
Ms. Pearson, is there a statewide or is there something else?
Madam Chair, this is Joyce. May I respond to that question? And
that would be wonderful.
Ask for the Attorney General to correct me if I get anything wrong. Parent excusal policies and timelines are determined at the local education provider level, meaning at the district and charter school level. Those are not decisions made by the state. So districts and charter schools can adjust their policies and practices as they deem appropriate.
Yeah, so Joyce, they could change those if they wanted to as time goes on, correct?
That is my understanding, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Not right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any other questions?
Madam Chair, could you have Joyce call me at some point? I wanted to just follow up with some questions.
Okay. Did you hear that, Joyce?
I did hear that, Madam Chair, and I will happily follow up. I'll reach out to find a convenient time for you.
Okay, and Joyce, do you have my cell?
I believe I do, and if I don't, I will connect with Angela.
Okay, great, thank you. Good to hear your voice.
I'm glad we all recognize each other's voice. Board Member Durham, did I see your hand up?
Well, yes, maybe, I don't know. I think it might be a good time to mention, because it's something that's come up in my district where we've had a district, I think, in violation of law and their accreditation agreement and federal Title I funding, say they were going to offer an opt-in to the test. And I think it's important probably to say on the record that those things are violating Colorado law, federal law, and probably the district's agreements with the state for accreditation. So, and that I think a reminder that it is at least inappropriate, if not illegal, for a district to actively, or a district employee to actively encourage opt-outs. just as I have worked very hard to make sure that districts did not penalize students whose parents did want them opting out, I do not believe it is appropriate for districts to do the opposite either. That this is something that should require the districts to schedule the tests without comment, and if those parents that wish to opt out should be graciously allowed to do so, and that should be the end of the district's involvement in these activities. So I hope that we get to a clear understanding on everyone's part of what everyone's legal and ethical obligations are. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Escarcega?
Oh, I'm not even muted. Whoops. It's a good thing I wasn't talking underneath my breath. No. I really don't really have any questions, just kind of a quick comment that I think I just want to thank all of the individuals and all of the organizations that have taken the time to write to us. And I know it takes time, I know it takes energy, and I want you to know we read it all and we listen to it all. So just want to throw that out there. You know, given the feedback from the department, from stakeholders, and even from what I'm hearing from the bill sponsors themselves, you know, Representative Sirota and Senator Zenzinger, I think an amend position right now is probably the best position, or to go into this as things continue to change, like hourly. So, thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Rankin?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I wanted to expound on what Board Member Durham said, and that is the opt-out. That's in the Colorado Revised Standards, that superintendents or board members or anybody working from the district cannot recommend to parents to opt out. And this year, in years prior, I haven't paid much attention to that, except I have had a couple of superintendents that I have heard recommended that. I don't know if CDE has a list of responses that they've heard from parents along these lines, but I do know this year it's even gone out on the Twitter feeds and even in the newspaper, so it's extremely blatant. And if we send a notice out to superintendents, but it's other people in the district that are doing it, those superintendents should know or be alerted to people in their district that are doing this, and it is against the law to do it. And they have, I believe, like 90 days to cease and desist, but that's 3 months, and we may be well into the testing before that happens. So there is no other way of doing it except to notify them, and I believe CDE has done that, but I don't know to what extent and how specific it is to the ones that are so blatant about it. So I just wanted to put that in there.
Thank you. Board Member Esser?
Just one more question I forgot. I was contacted by an administrator and a couple of parents about the opt-out and why there's so much, I almost want to say disinformation or conflicting information about all of this. Is that somewhere to be found on the CDE website so it's very clear what that means? And can you point me in the right direction?
Madam Chair, may I respond to that? We have historically had information about a parent excusal. I need to go back and check to see if those links are still active. And if we do not have an active link, we will remedy that situation.
That would be great. And administrators, and I shouldn't say this because I was an administrator, the rumor mill starts going instead of them actually looking for the right information on the website. Is there also a place they can go directly on your website for just administrators of school districts? I would assume the assessment director knows, but some of the things that come down are really strange.
Madam Chair, I have also seen some interesting things. And like I said, we will check to verify what our active links are shortly after this meeting, and know that we have been in recent communication on this issue with the district assessment coordinators as well as the superintendents.
Good. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Anything else, colleagues? All right, Ms. Mello, I guess you got your marching orders, such as they are.
I will say, and I expressed this to Dr. Esser when she and I spoke recently, we don't usually start off with things that are quite this substantive and hard from a legislative perspective. It's usually a little bit of a gentler entree into the legislative session, but you know, we live in interesting times, and so we are right into the thick of it with our first conversation. Thank you for your important insights and experience, and I will stay in close touch with all of you as this unfolds.
Thank you very much. Yes, nothing is as it has been in the past. So colleagues, we stand in adjournment until March 10th, if that's okay. See you all then. Stay safe.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Steve?
Thank you.
You're getting on another one?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Bye.